What is the most unexplainable, not to say paranormal, thing that you have ever witnessed? Did it change you or your beliefs in any way? My girlfriend and I heard a child's laughter at 4 a.m. in the middle of a field on campus of my university that used to be a residential school. There is an old children's graveyard on campus not far from where we were. I once watched a close friend of mine inexplicably defend Transformers 2 as a great movie for having made so much money. It changed my belief that he was capable of dressing himself in the morning. On a train going to work, sitting next to me are 3 elderly people, 2 women and 1 man, over 70 yo. Cabin is empty except for us. I'm not really paying attention to their conversation until one of the women says loudly that means they're also aliens, like you, Roger and me. I look over expecting them to laugh, figured they were making fun of each other, but all 3 are just starting at me with this weird smile. Just as I smile back, the eyes of the women who were speaking flashed green. I'm completely serious, they flashed green like LED lights. I mumbled something and got off the next stop. I had a medical condition called myelodysplastic syndrome, MDS, when I was about 12. It's basically a precursor to leukemia. I went to a top hospital in New York City about it for about 2 years and they eventually informed me that I would need a bone marrow transplant. The success rate given was about 50% and I wouldn't be allowed to leave my home until I turned 17. After a year or so of looking for a donor, the doctors couldn't find any traces of MDS in my system. Zero. This is a top-notch establishment with quality professionals. They had never heard of anything like this happening before. A few years ago I was in my room getting ready to go out. I started hearing something faint, like somebody talking through a wall, but it was in my room. I looked around, and I narrowed it down to my computer speakers. Sure enough I could hear garbled voices coming from the speakers. I have heard you can sometimes get radio stations coming in through speakers unintentionally, so I didn't think much of it, and shut them off. But that didn't stop it. I sat down and held the speaker in my hand, listening to the sounds I couldn't discern coming through the speaker. I pulled the plug out of the wall and disconnected the things from my computer. I was motionless, hairs on my neck and arms standing straight, listening to these noises until they eventually faded away. I thought I was going crazy. Thankfully I never heard said voices again. Still kind of creeps me out. I know what I heard. Me and my buddy were driving down Taunton Road, which turns into Steeles in Toronto. It's a weird road, because portions are very country-like with nothing but farms surrounding you. Then 10 minutes later you're in the middle of a city. Anyways, we are super bored. It's probably about 1 a.m. We are heading to Pacific Mall, huge Asian mall, for some bubble tea. Out of nowhere I see a large body on the road, about the size of a person or small deer. Hard to tell what it was, because we were driving so fast, with nothing but a huge pool of blood around it. There was blood almost across the entire road, and it looked kind of dried up, not a fresh pool or anything. After we both were screaming about it for a good 5 minutes, we decided to turn around and see what it was. We follow the road all the way back to my house. Nothing. Nothing was there, not a drop of blood, no body or anything. We will never know what happened that night. I was living in a hostel with my mates and there was a locket that made noises at night. At first we thought there was an animal trapped inside, so we turned on the lights and checked. Nobody was using that locker. There was nothing inside the locker, so we just left it alone and went back to sleep. But the banging continued, and it sounded as if someone/something is trapped inside and trying desperately to get out. We were kinda freaked out, and when we turned on the lights again we saw that the locker had jumped or shifted position from the banging. We decided to push it out of the room and locked it with my friend's padlock. The next morning, when we left the room, the padlock was unlocked and lying on the floor. The locker door was open. When I was about 8 I was looking for my brother, who is about 4 years older, around the house. I decided to look for him in his room. The door was open, and I saw him sitting on the ground with his PlayStation controller in his hand, blankly staring at me with the TV off. I still remember he was wearing a Chicago Bulls shirt. This was in a matter of seconds, so I did a double take, and he was gone. I called to Mum asking what happened to him. He was outside playing. He was also in another shirt. My brother got a little creeped out by that, and so do I. I still have the snapshot in my mind, and his expression was very creepy. My mom said, when I was around 2 years old I fell off the chair in the kitchen while trying to get down. She saw but didn't have a chance to catch me in time, but something else did. Out of nowhere I stopped falling, as if someone grabbed me by my shirt to catch me. It caught my fall and I landed on my feet. I remember it happening a little bit. My mom freaked out and called my dad on the phone to tell him what happened. I'm not religious, but I believe that there is someone watching over me. My guess is either a ghost or maybe even a guardian angel. I have no way to describe this completely, just know that it happened. I saw my grandmother the night she died, even though I live in Missouri and she was in Florida. She told me things were going to be fine and not to worry. I was a little kid when I told my parents. They said it was a dream. When they found out she passed away the next day, it kind of freaked them out. Had to spend a little time talking to a counselor. It made me wonder about energy and the energy of a human. Since energy can't be destroyed, perhaps it can be converted to other things besides heat and decay. I was driving with my dad when I was about 13, and I saw a blow-up doll blowing around in the wind. Only it wasn't a blow-up doll, it was a real woman. She hit the ground not far from our car. She looked like a total rag doll in the air, arms and legs kind of floating at weird angles. She had been hit by a small bus while running across the street and was sent flying into the air. She didn't die after being hit, nor after hitting the ground. I don't understand how she lived after falling from what looked like an impossible height. I don't understand how she was launched that far into the air. I mean, it's not at all unexplainable. I just can't understand how it could happen. About 2 years ago I used to have night terrors. Waking up in the middle of the night paralyzed, hearing voices and seeing demons and whatnot. What was bad is that I couldn't move or yell for help. My body was asleep, but my mind was active. It would scare me so much, and it happened so often I thought I was going insane. Worst thing ever. About a year ago, 18 at the time, I was at my home. I live alone in a house that has been in my family for quite some time, but even as a child this house has frightened me. It's a very dimly lit, very old-fashioned home. Being 20-year-old male, I don't have too much motivation to redecorate the place, so nothing has changed there. I get home from a long day of classes and work, so the first thing I do is dive on my bed and lay across it for a minute. I'm just laying down relaxing, gathering my thoughts, when all of a sudden I'm lifted by some invisible force from my bed by my feet/legs and slammed back down into my bed. The wind was knocked out of me and could feel the pressure from being slammed on my back. To this I try and convince myself it was just a dream, even though I've had a few more similar experiences, but I have never been more scared in my life. Me and a friend were walking in his woods around the age of 10. We were walking in an area of his woods that we referred to as the cliffs. All of a sudden, we came upon a man that was made out of tree bark and leaves. It was basically a tree man, or ent if you will. He stood up to what seemed like 10 feet and looked at us. We stopped dead in our tracks, took one glance at each other, and ran the entire way back to his house. I will never forget that. This is a story my dad told me while we were sharing paranormal stories. My dad occasionally helped out the elderly couple who lived next door. He'd always help the husband with odd jobs around their house, just to give him company and offer a lending hand. They became pretty good friends, and I think Don, the neighbor, really appreciated the help and company. One night while my dad was sleeping, he was awoken by a light tap on his shoulder. He thought it was my mom, but she was sound asleep next to him. He then heard Don's unmistakable voice in his ear whisper, "Thank you." Startled, he sat up and turned on the lights, but nothing was there, and warily went back to sleep. The next day we learned that Don had passed away in his sleep that night. TL/DR. Dad woken and thanked by neighbor's voice the night he passed away. This will get buried, but oh well. A good friend of mine had died, so I was visiting his grave. There is this pond filled with geese and ducks near it, and I wished I had brought bread to feed them. I find it peaceful. Not 2 seconds later, in my peripherals I see this thing fly through the air, hit a tree, and fall to the ground. I go to check it out, and it's a round dinner bread roll a little bigger than my fist. I got to feed the birds by my friend's grave. TL, doctor, dead friend, I want to feed the birds. Dinner roll appears out of nowhere. I'm not religious, but this shook me a bit. I have this suspicion that my friend's house is haunted. One day I went over there and tried to open the door, but it was locked. I text her and call a few times asking if she can open it, and after a few minutes I see a shadow come up to the door. It has one of those glass windows, and I heard the bolt unlock. Surely enough I could get inside, and no one was on the other side. My friend was upstairs in the shower. No one else was home. She still doesn't believe me. My then 3-year-old daughter had just learned how everyone has different favorites, and one day, while the two of us were riding in the back seat of a friend's car, she began quizzing people, as she was known to do, about their favorite color. At the time I was also 9 months pregnant with her baby brother, and after asking all of the adults in the car, she turns to me and asks, "Well, what is my little brother's favorite color?" To which I reply, "You will have to ask him yourself in a few weeks, honey." She laid her head on the side of my stomach. He would often kick her when she did this, and she found it very entertaining. After a few moments, in a lull in the adults' conversation, she says, "Mommy, my brother's favorite color is gray, because that is the only color he can see right now, and his name used to be James, and he liked to climb mountains, and that was the last thing he was doing before he was in your belly." We rode the rest of the drive in silence,